Throughout the upcoming week, we will be seeing and hearing a great deal about the 9/11 disaster, when 4 passenger jets were hijacked by Al-Qaeda Islamist extremists. 2 were flown into the Twin Towers of New York's World Trade Center. 1 hit the Pentagon, and the 4th crashed in a field in Pennsylvania after the passengers fought back. The 246 passengers and crew aboard the 4 planes were all killed. In New York, 2,600 died, and at the Pentagon, 125 were killed, for a total of 2,977 people, excluding the 19 hijackers. 441 first responders died attempting to save others. Thousands of others had their lives affected as a result of their injuries or illnesses attributed to the attacks. When faced with violent death, tragedy can make one evaluate what they truly value. Each year, as these deaths are remembered, we learn of heartbreak and memories, but we also hear of how others have overcome tragedy and been inspired by their own experiences or the stories of others. People whose lives were never the same, but who became better people, people who, having faced death, determined to live fuller and more rewarding lives. People who live exceptional lives for those who never got to fulfill their own. Tragedy can destroy lives, and does. Not all who experienced 9/11 recovered to participate fully in life, but buried themselves in a bottle or hid from a world they could no longer embrace, which, for them, made 9/11 a double tragedy. But tragedies come in many forms, to individuals and to nations. Some are unforeseeable accidents. Some are caused by nature, and some, such as 9/11 and war, by the malice of humankind. War results in terrible tragedies for individuals, but also for both the victors and the losers. Maimed, blind, and amputees return from every war, and those who do not return. Devastated cities, the widowed and orphaned. Although the worst disaster in Canadian history took place in 1917 during the First World War, it was only peripherally a statistic of war. The Halifax disaster took 2,000 lives, wounded many thousand more, and destroyed much of Halifax and Dartmouth. It was an explosion caused by our allies. A Norwegian steamship carrying supplies for Belgian relief was heading out of Halifax harbor when it collided with a French steamship carrying 3,224 tons of explosives headed for the French war effort. The resulting explosion caused a tsunami, which pressed some 3 blocks into the city, destroying more than 1,600 buildings and scattered debris for miles. It was the most powerful, man-made explosion to that date, and held that distinction until the development of atomic bombs in 1945. So powerful that Lieutenant Colonel Frank McKelvey Bell reported, "I have never seen anything on the battlefront equal to the scenes of destruction that I witnessed in Halifax today." The destruction was so terrible that when men who had been working away from their homes heard the explosion and rushed back to those homes in North End, Halifax, they couldn't even tell where their houses were because they couldn't even find the streets. Stories of the heroics of the military, the first responders, the morgue workers, and the whole city inspired the rebuilding of a better and safer city. The tragedy changed standards for harbors, hospitals, first responders, homes, and so much more. New safety standards resulted not just in Halifax, but throughout much of the world. But at such a cost. Out of tragedy often come stories of incredible heroism and sacrifice that inspires generations to follow. Think of the sinking of the Titanic, the result of the hubris of man in believing that nature had been conquered and that icebergs no longer were a threat. The tragedy took the lives of 1,347 men, 103 women, and 53 children, and gave us stories that would be repeated to generations to come. For instance, as the ship went down, the Salvation Army band playing "Nearer, My God, to Thee" to console the passengers who could not escape. The chivalry of the crew and passengers as they respected the rules of their society in a crisis. The most important people were to be saved first: the women and children. The inadequate number of lifeboats aboard the unsinkable ship meant that most of the men were unable to leave the doomed vessel. Tragedies and disasters are not a creation of our generation. One of the more famous natural disasters goes back to 79 AD, when the city of Pompeii in Italy was buried under more than 15 feet of volcanic ash and pumice when Mount Vesuvius erupted. The moment it was buried was frozen in time. A wealthy town of about 20,000 saw a majority of its people escape the first day as the pumice fell. However, almost 1,200 whose bodies have been found did not. Some delayed their flight to collect their valuables and died with them. But the majority who died seem to have been unable or unwilling to leave, and are found in homes, families together, with some bodies seeking to protect those they loved with their own bodies. COVID is only the world's most recent worldwide medical disaster. It's not the first medical tragedy to take a significant number of lives. And at just 15 million, it does not compare to the two leading plagues which spread far and wide. The Black Death of the 14th century was the greatest killer, taking an estimated 100 to 200 million lives across Asia, Africa, and Europe. The Spanish flu that followed the First World War was the second great killer, claiming 500 million infections and 17 to 50 million deaths. Disease and infections are an ongoing threat that haunts the world until a cure is found, from malaria to polio to measles, STDs, or scarlet fever. Unlike war, there's no obvious enemy that one can fight. The heroes are the lab workers that seek out the cures and vaccines, and the frontline workers who risk their lives each day as they go to work. As we remember the deaths of so many over time and space, the best way that we can honor them is by working to make the world a better and safer and healthier place. Some disasters cannot be averted. Some can. Let's commit ourselves to being there for others when tragedies or disasters happen. It is all part of making our world a better place for all of us. So may it be. Amen. Remember those who died and those whose lives are forever changed by tragedy and disaster, those who die and those who are left behind and those who cannot forget, not even for a moment. And let us work to make lives better for survivors and pray for the peace of the departed souls.